Hi class, let us briefly evaluate the topics of Unit 3 today. Beginning with what is data collection? It is a process by which the researcher collects the information needed to answer the research problem. Now remember, this stage only comes after the initial first two stages. The task of collection of data begins firstly after a research problem has been defined and identified. Remember, we have done this in class. And the research design is chalked out. So initially you have to first identify a problem and then you have to chalk out or figure out what kind of research design you're going to use for your study. The next question arises in the mind of the researcher is, what methods of selecting a method should the researcher apply? It depends on many aspects. What kind of data you have, how to collect the data, who will collect the data, when the data has to be collected, and there are so many aspects to it. And your method that initially you're going to select of data collection would depend on all the various aspects involved here. Before understanding what are the various methods of data collection, I would like to take you through the rundown of types of data. We'll initially talk about two different types of data, the primary data and the secondary data. Now, what is primary data? Primary data are those which are collected for the first time and are original in characteristics. Many of you in your research for the fourth sem in MRP are going to collect primary data. Now, secondary data are those which have already been collected by someone and which have, through some statistical analysis, been used. And many of you would also go for a secondary data analysis. Now remember, you have to select the methods of your data collection on the basis of the resources which are available to you, the credibility, the resources which you can get very easily, how you can analyze or report the data, and the skills you deserve. Let's move on with our discussion here. Now, initially, I'm going to teach you primary data, how it can be collected. There are several methods of collecting primary data. Some of the important methods involved experiments, surveys, observations, questionnaires, and schedules. Yes, the most important ones shall be discussed here. Surveys. Now, what is surveys? Basically, the government of India conducts important surveys. You can conduct important surveys. Surveys to collect the data you require to answer your research problems. There are several ways you can conduct a survey. Let's move on to observations. What are observations? It is seen phenomenon. You as an observer, you're a systematic viewer. So observation is systematic viewing. Data collected by the observer with the help of observation. Observation method is a method under which the data can be collected from the field itself by the observer himself. Now, I would like to say there are so many effective observation methods. If you talk about determining what needs to be observed, selecting the participants, conducting the observation, compiling the data collected, and analyzing and interpreting the data collected. Observations has several modes. We can go for a structured observation, we can go for an unstructured observation. In a structured observation, everything is standardized. In unstructured observations, it takes without the characteristics of structure. For example, there is no styling, there is no recording, there is no standardizing. There can be participant observation, there can be non-participant observation, controlled, uncontrolled. There are so many ways of observations which are formal and informal ways. But again, there are several advantages to it. A large quantity of data can be evaluated with the help of observation. All the data obtained from observation are usable. This is relatively inexpensive. Remember that. This becomes a very important parameter when you go for collection of primary data. The observation technique can be stopped or begun at any time. So this all depends on the convenience of the observer. There are several disadvantages as well. Limited information is gathered. The observer may be biased. Sometimes going to places and observing things becomes very expensive. As I told you, money becomes a very important parameter when you go for observation. Interviewing selected subjects may provide more information economically than waiting for the spontaneous occurrence of that situation. So sometimes interview becomes better than observations. Extensive training is also required for the same. I would like to say observation and interview form a very important background for research. Interview, a very important method, as I stated. The interviewer asks questions to the respondents. This is basically asking questions. It's an oral verbal stimuli. And the responses are gathered in form of oral verbal responses. It's as simple as that. We can prepare the schedule of interview. We can conduct the interview, analyze and interpret the data. There can be structured interviews, there can be unstructured interviews, there can be focused interviews, clinical interviews, group interviews, qualitative and quantitative interviews. When I talk about structured interviews, I could say in this case a set of pre-decided questions are there. In unstructured interview, we follow a system of predetermined question or not. Doesn't matter here because it's unstructured. And in focused interview, attention is focused on the given experience of the respondents and its possible effects. In clinical interviews, we are concerned with broad underlying feelings or motivations of or with the course of an individual's life experience. This again forms a part of diagnostic interviews where we diagnose a problem. Group interviews may be conducted with 6 or 8 individuals who can be interviewed together. Quantitative or qualitative interviews divide on the basis of subject matter, whether they are qualitative or quantitative. There can be individual interviews, there can be selected interviews. Interviews has several advantages and disadvantages. I would like to start with disadvantages first. There can be respondent biasness, there can be interviewer biasness, it's time consuming, it's expensive. Plus, you have to actually ask for the respondent's time, which is very difficult to get. Remember, I told you in class, time is the most difficult resource to manage. It is irreversible. But there are several advantages. Personal information can be obtained. You can actually analyze the body language of the respondents and you can judge whether the respondent is telling things which are correct or not. Now, resistance may be overcome by skilled interviewers. More information can be gathered, that too in depth. So I would say interviewing is a very good technique for primary data collection. A questionnaire is sent to the person from whom the interviewer wants to collect data. It consists of number of questions targeted to get answers for research question. A questionnaire consists of a number of questions. Now they can be in printed form. They can be sent to the person who is the respondent. You can prepare your questions according to your research problem, select your respondents, send them the questionnaire, tabulate data, analyze and interpret it. There can be several forms of questionnaire. Remember, a questionnaire should be prepared very wisely. It can be open-ended, it can be close-ended. In open-ended, you can ask the respondent to actually write his overview. But in close-ended, it is you are asking him a question, you're restricting his answer, and he has to answer according to your choices. So, in that case, he doesn't have options to explore. But there are so many things which make a questionnaire a good one. The sequence is to be followed. It should be short. It should be simple. It should provide adequate space for answers. The technical terms should be avoided. It should be clearly represented. It should be easy to read, easy to interpret. These shall be the essentials of a good questionnaire. Now, questionnaires have lots of advantage. They don't involve a lot of cost. They don't involve traveling. They can be collected in a short span of time. But they can be time consuming as well because the respondent might have the option of not answering. In that case, the response becomes delayed. This method can be slow. The possibility of unclear replies may be there. If I compare interview with questionnaire distribution, I would say in case of interview, you're sitting in front of the interviewer asking him questions, and when you don't get an adequate answer, you can ask him more to actually explore his answers, which would initially or eventually cater to your research problem question. But in case of questionnaire, you don't have the option. You eventually have to accept whatever the respondent is telling you. There are very similar the questionnaires and schedules. The only difference is it's a form of a questionnaire where the enumerate is going there and collecting himself and is appointed for the purpose. The main difference is a schedule is filled by the enumerator who is specially appointed for the purpose. Enumerator goes to the respondents, asks them the questions from the questionnaire in order listed, records, responses, space provided. Simple. But he must be trained in that case. But this is relatively a more correct method, a more correct way of asking questions. It becomes costly because in that case, you have to employ a person who would go and ask questions, or you have to go yourself. So this becomes time consuming and costly in that case. This part is over. Let us begin with the next part, measurement scaling. It is a procedure for the assignment of numbers to a property of objects in order to import some of the characteristics of numbers to properties in question. There are so many methods of scaling. Initially, remember in class we discussed what is a nominal scale, what is the ordinal scale, what is an interval scale, and what is a ratio scale. Nominal scale, I would say we just assign numbers. In ordinal scales, we compare its relative. In interval scale, we talk about equal intervals. And in ratio scale, we talk about going to the sum zero, closure to zero. Now, all these scales, different types of rating scales and ranking scales, shall be distributed in two categories. In these, in these four categories: the nominal scale, the ordinal scale, the interval, and the ratio. Initially, when I start discussing with you about different types of rating scales and different types of ranking scales, I would also say whether it's a nominal scale or an ordinal scale or interval scale or ratio scale.